I'm number 22. My name is Matt Walker, and I'm the Community Outreach Director with Clean Air Council. Air pollution is now officially the most widespread and biggest cause of cancer. 1 out of every 4 kids in Philadelphia has asthma. I'm a first-time father of a 6-month-old and do not want my son to become another part of the sobering statistics about public health impacts of air pollution. The Environmental Protection Agency has determined that carbon pollution will endanger public health by exacerbating climate change, creating warmer temperatures that will cause an increased number of bad ozone days. Ground-level ozone, the main constituent of smog, has been linked with many respiratory diseases, cancer, stroke, and premature death. Standards that limit the amount of carbon pollution that existing power plants can dump into the air have a great potential to curb climate change. But in order to be effective, the standards need to be well-designed and fully analyzed. The natural gas industry must not get a free pass. EPA's framework for state implementation should be flexible enough to be applied in different states, but specific enough to ensure that substantial emission reductions occur across all types of fossil fuel plants. EPA could analyze each state's greenhouse gas emissions data and determine a percentage reduction target that states or regions would have to meet. Each existing stationary source could be required to upgrade plants to achieve their share of emission reductions. These control technology standards should become more stringent over time. A carbon tax would be the most effective way to reduce carbon, but this is outside of EPA's power. A cap and trade system would be the next best approach. Power plants that cut more than required could sell these credits in the marketplace to other owners who determined it's not as cost effective to upgrade equipment. States or regions should be required to inventory all power plant emissions and ensure that reduction targets are met. State agencies should require power plant owners to submit a plan on how they will incorporate control technologies to reduce pollution at a facility, or if they want to plan to purchase credits. States will be responsible for determining what each company must do so that the state meets the federal standards. This plan will be submitted to EPA for approval. If the goal of these standards is to curb the effects of climate change, EPA must create an ambitious proposal for existing plants that does not merely phase out coal and promote the use of natural gas. The standards should be robust enough to help our country switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources coupled with energy efficiency. Our public health and our children's health and future is too important to gamble on dirty and inefficient fossil fuels. Thank you.
My name is Jackson Morris. I'm Director of Strategic Engagement with the Pace Energy and Climate Center based at Pace Law School. I'm here representing the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI EPA Rules Collaborative, an effort that the Pace Energy and Climate Center convenes and staffs. Our collaborative includes many electric generators who will be subject to forthcoming standards of performance under the Section 111 of the Clean Air Act and are currently compliance entities under the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. In addition, many own and operate assets outside of the RGGI region. RGGI, along with other state and local programs, as well as solutions being deployed by power companies across the nation to cut CO2 emissions, provide the building blocks for EPA action. The RGGI EPA Rules Collaborative formed to engage EPA and other states on forthcoming EPA rules aimed at reducing carbon pollution from existing power plants and state plans to implement those rules. The following organizations are part of the collaborative and include utilities, electric generators, environmental groups, business coalition, state agency staff throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region, including but not limited to Calpine Corporation, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Consolidated Edison, Environmental Defense Fund, Environment Northeast, Exelon Corporation, National Grid, Natural Resources Defense Council, New England Clean Energy Council, and NextEra Energy. The RGGI EPA Rules Collaborative has agreed upon the following principles that the group believes should guide the EPA as they draft their carbon regulations for new and existing power plants. 1. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative should qualify as a compliance mechanism framework under forthcoming EPA rules under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. EPA should allow additional states to use the RGGI cap and trade mechanism to meet federal Section 111D emission reduction requirements, subject to a determination of performance level equivalency. 2. Federal guidelines should not penalize early movers. Accordingly, the guidelines should give states, including those participating in RGGI, appropriate credit for the emissions reductions achieved due to efforts taken prior to the effective date of the federal requirements. 3. In determining what is the best system of emissions reduction that has been adequately demonstrated, as those terms are used in Section 111A1 of the Clean Air Act, EPA should evaluate the RGGI cap and trade mechanism as an applicable model for other interested states. 4. EPA should support states interested in participating in RGGI with assistance to facilitate the use of the RGGI mechanism to achieve reductions. Thank you.
I thank the panel for your work here today. I am Kevin Stewart, and I serve as Director of Environmental Health for the American Lung Association of the Mid-Atlantic. I represent not only the 3 million people in our 4-state service area who suffer from chronic lung disease, but also the tens of millions more who desire to breathe clean air and so protect their good health. And we support the EPA's proposal of September 20th to set carbon pollution standards for new power plants. Not only do we urge the EPA to set a final standard within a year, but also to establish similar standards for existing power plants. There are standards, and properly so, for air toxics, acid gases, heavy metals, smog-forming and soot-forming emissions from power plants, and there is no excuse for there not to be standards for carbon pollution as well. Anything less shortchanges our health and that of our children. We are here to remind everyone of why we need strong controls on carbon pollution and on air pollution in general. Addressing carbon pollution will help protect public health. People at special risk of sickness or even death include infants, children, the elderly, persons with asthma or COPD, those who are immune compromised, and people in indigent and minority communities. Carbon pollution will result in higher temperatures that can enhance the conditions for ozone, smog formation. Even with the steps that are in place to reduce smog, increasing temperatures are likely to increase the risk of unhealthful smog levels in large parts of the United States and to lengthen the ozone season. However, the Lung Association's concerns are not limited to the direct effects of temperature on smog formation. We also recognize other consequences. Increased carbon dioxide levels would promote the growth of plants and hence would result in the production of more ozone precursors. Pollen and mold spore production would also increase. These are known to act synergistically with ozone to exacerbate asthma and allergies. Effects are compounded as higher temperatures would result in increased energy production and electricity use, e.g. for air conditioning, and in concomitant emissions. The risk of wildfires and air pollution would increase. Vector-borne diseases also show signs of doing so. Exposure to pesticides to control these vectors would be another issue. And as we speak, Super Typhoon Haiyan, one of the largest and most severe in history, is wreaking destruction across the Philippines. The storm surge estimates range into the dozens of feet. In our service area, the storm surge of Superstorm Sandy resulted in mold and health problems in tens of thousands of homes that people experience to this day. Although no occurrence of any particular storm can be laid exclusively at the feet of global warming, the science is clear that we can expect more frequent extreme storms like these. The American Lung Association's mission is to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. And let's get about the business of saving some lives.
Good morning. My name is Shane Kenyon. I'm a pediatrician and asthma researcher at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. In my clinical role, I take care of children who are admitted to the hospital with life-threatening conditions. As a researcher, I study factors and circumstances that drive the use of emergency rooms in hospitals for children with asthma. My world is a mix of big data and the clinical stories that each data point represents. I thought I might share a bit of each with you today. Just recently, I took care of Monica, a charming 6-year-old with persistent asthma who was hospitalized with a severe asthma attack. Despite seeing her primary care doctor a number of times and increasing doses of her medication to help with her breathing, she came to the emergency room in severe distress, nearly unable to breathe. She needed nearly every medication we could give her to prevent respiratory arrest. Fortunately, with intensive medical therapy, her breathing slowly improved, and after 5 days, two in the ICU, she went home. She was sent home on increasing doses of her asthma medication and careful directions to make her home safer for children with severe asthma. Her family was familiar with these instructions, which they had heeded in the past. Her mother's question for me was, how do things she can't control, like pollution, contribute to asthma? With over 2,500 childhood asthma admissions per year at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia alone, and over 150,000 nationally, you can imagine how frequently this question is asked. For children like Monica, there are strong data linking products of carbon combustion, particularly ozone and particulate matter, to more frequent attacks of asthma and other respiratory conditions. In addition, carbon emissions are linked to rising average temperatures, which tend to enhance pollen and airborne allergen production from plants, leading to more days a child like Monica is at risk for a severe asthma attack. I can't say with precision how much carbon emission and airborne allergen production contribute to her to near-death events for children with respiratory illnesses such as asthma, but I believe the stakes are too high for child health to stand and allow such an experiment to occur. 10% of children living in the U.S. have asthma, and rates in some Philadelphia neighborhoods are nearly 30%. It is in these children's interest to consider the unintended consequences of carbon emission, 38% of which comes from power plants, on their health. To be clear, I am not suggesting that strengthening carbon emission standards alone would have prevented Monica's severe asthma flare and the associated cost. These flares are usually the result of multiple factors. But the data are clear that products of carbon combustion, particularly ozone and particulate matter, make asthma and other respiratory conditions worse. Setting strong standards to reduce carbon emission from new and existing power plants is a step in the right direction. Just imagine what Monica, her mother, and so many others would say if they were here today. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to present my perspective on this important issue.
Climate change is the single largest threat to the future health and viability of wildlife populations around the globe. Scientific papers in the top peer-reviewed journals are projecting major global declines in biodiversity as a result of climate change. Many species are expected to lose half their ranges or more, pushing populations to the brink of extinction. Already, the birds of North America have demonstrated susceptibility to climate changes. Data collected over the last 100 years all across this country show that a majority of bird species ranges shift with temperature and precipitation changes. And Audubon's newest research raises concerns that these trends will become unsustainable within this century for large numbers of American birds. These changes are not affecting one or two or a handful of species. Worldwide, more than 3/4 of plant and animal species have exhibited changes associated with climate change already. Looking ahead, it is apparent that continuing climate change trends will cause widespread species extinctions. Scientists now estimate that more than half of the world's plant species and 1/3 of all animal species are dangerously vulnerable to impending climate impacts. Many of our federal agencies view climate change as one of the top issues impacting their missions today. The National Climate Adaptation Strategy issued by NOAA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies plainly states the need for action now to safeguard our wildlife and ecosystems. Prompt and stringent carbon mitigation can reduce the risk of substantial biodiversity losses, but we must take action swiftly and aggressively to reduce carbon emissions. Audubon has supported EPA's work to limit carbon emissions from new sources, but this alone is not enough. With power plants representing the single largest source of carbon pollution in the U.S., we cannot achieve the necessary level of carbon reductions unless we also change the carbon profile of existing power plants. In light of this, Audubon strongly supports carbon standards for existing power plants. We urge EPA to implement flexible but tough standards that will encourage states to promote wider use of energy efficiency, renewables, and other clean resources. High penetrations of renewables are feasible. Demand-side resources are highly economical, and we have no time to delay. The longer we put off transitioning to cleaner power resources, the more difficult we make it to solve the carbon problem. Audubon therefore urges EPA to move ahead aggressively at this time to implement strong carbon standards for existing power plants. Thank you.
And I'm reading this statement on behalf of Sister Mary Elizabeth Clark, a sister at St. Joseph of Philadelphia. She represents the Sisters of St. Joseph in Chestnut Hill College of Philadelphia. She is also an ambassador of the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Climate Change Coalition. She speaks from the faith perspective and the moral imperative of doing no harm to God's creation. She writes, I implore you to write emission guidelines for reducing carbon pollution from existing fossil fuel power plants that truly make a difference for global climate. As Pope Francis has said in his call to us all, whenever human beings fail to live up to environmental responsibility, whenever we fail to care for creation and for our brothers and sisters, the way is opened to destruction and hearts are hardened. Let us be protectors of creation. The tradition of Catholic social teaching offers a developing and distinctive perspective on environmental issues. We believe that the following themes drawn from the tradition are integral dimensions of ecological responsibility. 1, a God-centered and sacramental view of the universe, which grounds human accountability for the fate of the earth. 2, a consistent respect for human life, which extends to respect for all creation. 3, a worldview affirming the ethical significance of global interdependence and the common good. 4, an ethics of solidarity promoting cooperation and a just structure of sharing in the world community. 5, an understanding of the universal purpose of created things, which requires equitable use of the earth's resources. 6, an option for the poor, which gives passion to the quest for an equitable and sustainable world. And last, a conception of authentic development, which offers a direction for progress that respects human dignity and the limits of material growth. In Centesimus Annus, former Pope Benedict insisted that the state has the task of providing, quote, for the defense and preservation of common good, such as the natural and human environments which cannot be safeguarded simply by market forces. You can see that all these principles apply to your decisions about writing emissions rules for fossil fuel power plants. Today, as you consider carbon limits on fossil fuel plants, which are the single largest source of climate pollution in the US, most often located in poor communities, I urge you to make sure that those limits truly do the job of reducing pollution and global climate change. Although as a member of the PA Interfaith Power and Light, we do our best to reduce our own carbon footprint, this pales in the presence of coal-powered plants. We know millions of Americans.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Elwood. I'm a board member of Evangelical Environmental Network. I edit the website belovedplanet.com, and I live in Andover, New Jersey. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify in support of the EPA's efforts to establish meaningful standards on carbon emissions from existing power plants. The core question is this: how much carbon pollution should utilities be permitted to dump into the atmosphere for others to pay for in health and in climate disruption costs? The answer would seem to be pretty simple. It's clearly wrong for a buyer and seller to enjoy all the benefits of a transaction and then leave a substantial portion of that cost for everyone else to pick up. Until recently, however, we didn't really know the scale of these costs. But in 2010, the US National Academy of Sciences produced a study called The Hidden Cost of Energy: Unpriced Consequences of Energy Production and Use. Its findings were shocking. Coal burned in a single year by US power plants cost everyone else on the planet another 200 to 300 billion in external costs. That's billion with a B. That's a tax of about $40 levied on every human on Earth, only for US coal and only for one single year. Earlier this year, the Christian Reformed Church sent a delegation of leaders to Kenya to hear firsthand from people who have been affected by these external costs. We met with hundreds of small farmers and community leaders, and everywhere the story was the same. 2 reliable growing seasons in years past have shrunk to a single season. Even that single season is now unreliable. Crop yields have plummeted. Water is more scarce than ever. We also visited with the General Secretary of the Kenyan Council of Churches. He told us, and I quote, "We are very concerned, especially about America. They are the most obstinate country when it comes to climate change. You have a responsibility to reduce your greenhouse gases, which are harming the rest of the world. Long after your life is over, Your actions will have consequences on us. Many of them will be harmful consequences. On behalf of all people who bear the cost of American carbon pollution, our citizens, our children, the people of Kenya, plus many more, I urge the EPA to develop and implement comprehensive standards aimed at reducing these emissions by existing American power plants. Thank you very much.
Pennsylvanians have already submitted more than 200,000 comments in support of limiting carbon pollution from power plants, while hundreds of elected officials, business leaders, and doctors have voiced their support for reining in the biggest polluters. Now, faced with a historic opportunity to cut global warming pollution from power plants, there is no excuse for inaction or delay. If we want a cleaner, safer future for our kids, we can't afford to ignore power plants' disproportionate contribution to global warming. In Pennsylvania, tackling the problem means cleaning up the dirtiest power plants. Penn Environment Research and Policy Center recently released a report titled America's Dirtiest Power Plants that showed that America's power plants are the nation's single largest source of carbon pollution. They produce more than 40% of our nation's total global warming pollution, and an even higher percentage, 47%, here in Pennsylvania. And a handful of the dirtiest plants make up a huge portion of our emissions. For example, the 50 dirtiest US plants alone emit more carbon pollution than all but 6 other entire countries. We know there's a better way than dirty power plants. This is a problem that has a solution. Harness the power of the wind and the sun, make our buildings smarter and more efficient, and slash our dependence on the dirtiest sources of energy. And we know what it'll take to get there. In Pennsylvania, we're already taking steps to shift away from dirty power plants and toward a clean energy future. Global warming's worst impacts will be felt by future generations, but destructive hurricanes and crippling droughts are a problem for our time. Let's not ignore the message that these devastating events are sending us. Failure to act wouldn't just be a betrayal of future generations, it would be sticking our heads in the sand. So on behalf of Penn Environment and our thousands of citizen members across the state, I urge EPA to develop a strong rule limiting carbon from existing power plants to protect our children and future generations from the worst impacts of global warming. Pennsylvania is the 3rd biggest emitter of carbon pollution from the biggest sources.
Thank you.
And we can't afford to wait. Thank you.
Today, each point is related to the idea that we no longer have to make the choice between doing what's right by the environment and doing what's right by the economy. In fact, I think it's a false choice. And I believe that I'm uniquely qualified to talk on this issue because I'm a university professor in a well-respected business school in the local area here. I have 22 years of experience in talking about, writing about, and doing research in sustainability. I also have 20 years of teaching experience and specifically have been teaching business sustainability classes at St. Joseph's University for the past 3 years at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. In the end, what's right by the environment will indeed be beneficial to the economy. And I want to make 3 quick suggestions to you. First, establish a stable, predictable price for carbon. Second, disentangle utility company profits from energy consumption. And 3, allow customers to sell energy back to the grid. Now, I'd like to talk about each of these 3 quickly so that I can elaborate on each of those 3 points. First, putting a stable, predictable price on carbon with a tax will put the tax burden on the individuals who are creating the problem. Using more carbon-based fuels is bad for all of us. And all of us are currently bearing the burden of a warming climate. Several years ago, it made sense to eliminate smoking on airplanes and in other enclosed places like restaurants and offices because it was bad for us. In the same way, carbon consumption is bad for all of us, and when something is bad for us, we need to cut back on its use by making it more inconvenient and costly. Thus, a tax on carbon makes it more inconvenient and costly to use it. Countries around the world are already doing this. Why? Because carbon consumption is bad for us. An important point to make here is that a predictable, stable price on carbon will encourage investment in a variety of new technologies and that focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy. Very few investors will commit capital to a project unless there is a guaranteed floor below which the price of carbon cannot drop. These investors can create jobs. Second point, utility company profits need to be disentangled from consumption. Right now, there is no incentive for utility companies to encourage energy conservation, energy efficiency, or renewable energy. In short, utility companies lose money when their customers lose money. We have to change that. And third, when consumers generate their own energy using solar panels, wind turbines, and so forth, they should be able to sell their energy back to the grid. Right now, there are inconsistent policies across the states and municipalities that don't allow this. In some areas of the U.S., you can sell your energy back to the grid, in others you cannot. There needs to be a consistent policy across the nation. So thank you very much for your time. I certainly appreciate it.
I am a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm also a member of the Climate Reality Project. So what brought me here today is my grandchildren, and I have 7, so I have a lot of work to do. But I've come to realize in the last couple of years since I retired how difficult this challenge is going to be, and when I look at the work that you do and how much work you do that's unappreciated, I see what a difficult task it is when you tackle something of this size. As a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, we're asking for a tax on carbon. But the tax has to be fair in a way that takes all the cost of that energy from carbon. We know coal has a higher carbon footprint than natural gas, but we also know that gas wells in Pennsylvania are leaking methane into the atmosphere, and all of that must be accounted for in the carbon tax. The second part of our proposal is to rebate that money back to the consumer. So it would be in a revenue neutral scheme where carbon is taxed at its source and it's rebated to the consumer, thereby allowing them to defer some of that cost and helping to get wind power and solar power up and running in a state that they can take on this huge burden that we have. And what we think that that's doable even in a Republican Congress because it isn't really taxed, it's revenue neutral. We're asking, we've asked every member of Congress to do that. We've presented it to every member of Congress. And when I do my presentations for Climate Reality, I show people what this looks like in the world today. And I'm asking for the EPA is, we looked at your standards, we think they're reasonable, we think that they're doable for industry in a time frame that you have stated, and I'd like to see those standards pushed forward to existing power plants over phased in over a period of time. And I have a couple seconds, so I will just say that last night I had the privilege of talking to climate scientist Dr. Michael Mann, and I specifically asked him about your proposals. And his words to me were, they're good. They're a good first step. Thank you.
To rise. We all paid for the external costs of this so-called cheap energy in many ways, such as billions of dollars a year in subsidies for fossil fuels, mostly in the form of tax credits, the enormous costs associated with worsening droughts, firestorms, and hurricanes, the costs of increased illness and mortality due to mining pollution, destroyed ecosystems and waterways, and whole mountains gone forever. A number of studies conclude that if the external costs associated with coal were included in the price, it would be 2 to 3 times more expensive than it is today. If we had been paying the true cost of energy, efficiency would be built into every building and product we use, and the marketplace for alternatives would be flourishing. So EPA, what are some things you might consider as part of this rule? First, your timeline where states have until June 2016 to submit their plans is very slow for a problem so acute. So I urge that your guidance documents set a high bar in the first year of implementation. Modifications of power plants to achieve the BSER will take time and investment. So by setting a high bar in the first year, power plants will know they have to get started well before 2016. Write the guidance to strongly incent states to do the following as part of their plan. Provide job training and fair work transition programs for coal employees. Create robust energy efficiency building standards. Pass high alternative energy portfolio requirements. Institute long-term renewable tax credit programs. Promote reforestation and discourage deforestation. Pass strong regulations for gas drilling. And since some states will be significantly more affected than others, consider allowing states to form cooperative regions to take advantage of each other's strengths and resources. I would say, except for the 5 counties that voted on Tuesday to secede from Colorado, they're on their own. And finally, there should be real consequences for missed targets. Our grandchildren will live through most of this century and should not find themselves...
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Number 19, otherwise known as Ed Yankovich. I represent the United Mine Workers of America. I'm an international vice president, but my trade is coal mining. I was a coal miner for 14 years, and I've been working for the union for the past 24. And I want to thank the panel for allowing us to speak today. Our international union will be presenting a white paper that about this issue, but I wanted to just make some remarks about the community of which I represent. First of all, and foremost, certainly something has to be done. What we're asking the EPA is to give us reasonable time. Don't make the rulemaking process that it would stop these current plants from operating. There has to be a reasonable time. There has to be an ability to get control technology economically fit into these plants. And certainly, there has to be some sort of help to get technology into new coal-fired plants. I think it's clear that it's in the best interest of national security in our whole nation that we have a balanced energy portfolio. And to disallow coal altogether, I think is a total mistake. It will be devastation to Appalachian communities, the communities from where my members live. Absolute devastation. I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, northern West Virginia, southern West Virginia, Alabama, eastern Ohio. These communities will be completely devastated if these operators cannot produce coal because there's no place to sell it, there's no plants to sell it. And there's a group of people who will be directly affected about this that can't come to this microphone today, but I want to speak in their behalf. There's 90,000 UMWA pensioners who rely on a pension check every month. And that check is funded because we collectively bargain money from the coal operators on hours worked to pay for their pensions. And if those coal operators aren't in existence anymore, these retirees who worked all their lives won't have a pension. Over $400 million is spent in health care benefits, just in Pennsylvania alone, for these retirees. That's 90,000 nationwide, 15,000 in Pennsylvania. The $400 million every year goes into local area hospitals, and that's who will get devastated. See, this would be a community devastation because the hospitals where I live are dependent upon UMWA healthcare benefits. So, please, all we're asking is reasonability when you consider these rules and consider all our communities as well. Thank you.
America, I've been a coal miner for the past 6 years. Wasn't a field I planned on going into. I was raised in a coal family. I'm a 4th generation coal miner. My father made a lot of sacrifices for me to get where I'm at today, as long as my brother. He worked above and beyond to make sure we had a better future. Went to college. I personally struggled through college. I got my degree. When I graduated college, the area that I grew up in, there's just not many quality jobs besides coal industry, power plants, and so forth. So I decided to go into the coal industry against my mother's will. And it has been nothing but a good decision for me. I am currently married, I have 3 children, and I want to make sure that I can provide for them so they have a better future. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that I can provide for them and give them the money to pay for their college, like my parents did for me. My wife is a stay-home wife, and this job in the coal industry makes that happen. We have excellent benefits, excellent pay, and I mean, there's just so many other stories like mine. I mean, we have guys at our mine that could have retired years upon years ago, but they still have kids in college and that they're paying for. We have numerous guys that have a master's degree, young guys, and the best they could do is the coal industry. That's the best job that they could get for them and their families. And these carbon burdens that you're putting on the coal-fired power plants just need some time to implement, and we just ask that you sit down and work with the coal industry, work with the power plants. Let's come up with a reasonable solution, and let's make a better America. Thank you for your time.
What you're looking at here is an endangered species. That's what you're looking at right now. You're looking at an endangered species. Another endangered species we looked at was in the 80s was coal mining towns. When the industry bottomed out, that town basically disappeared. From 12 to 1,500 people living there to 277. Because of over-regulation, trading with different countries, the coal wasn't needed as much because there was other places it was going to. Now, the industry is revived, and I think regulation is good. We need regulation. On some things, yes. More than others, absolutely. Do we need to over-regulate? No. I think there needs to be an agreeable symmetry between the power stations and the Environmental Protection Agency to have something help us to maintain our future, but at the same time, this energy, pound for pound, is cheaper than any other form of energy out there. It's available. It is there, and we extract it. We extract it for less than it would to build solar panels or dam up a river and use hydroelectricity. The jobs are massive in these areas. But what we're doing is we're regulating so hard, so fast, that you're killing the people, in a sense, who need these jobs in the future. And if we do that, we continue to over-regulate, or we continue to not see what's viable in the future, we're going to end up hurting ourselves. Industry creates a better economy. You take away that industry, you take away your economy. There are so many things you're going to hear today. It's going to be redundancy, redundancy, redundancy. But you need to remember, it's the faces you need to look at. It's the faces you need to put to these regulations, these industries, these jobs, and the people that are going to make it happen. Thank you.
But I appreciate the opportunity to speak here on this. We, the utility workers, we represent 50,000 workers in the energy industry, and electric distribution, power generation, natural gas, and water utilities. And we're quite aware of, like everybody else that's got their eyes open, at the problem with climate change. Many of our members are first responders. They were involved in Katrina, Irene, and of course Sandy. They left their own homes damaged to bring back electric service and get natural gas to a lot of those affected people. But through this whole debate, there's one group of people that are usually left out. And when we look at the devastation caused by Sandy and we see hundreds of people's homes destroyed, naturally our first instinct is to help those people, and we should. But there's a lot of other folks that are suffering in silence when some of these plants are shut down. And those are the people that work in the plants. In some cases, as many as 400 or 500 people can be let out the door. A lot of these plants are in rural areas where that's the only place to work. It's not easy to find, when your skills are limited to operating these plants, it's not easy to find work anywhere in that immediate area. What we're proposing is, in cases where plants do get shut down, of course our position is that, we're frustrated here as well because we have plants out there that have met the regs, the EPA regs. For instance, Brayton Point, it's just after putting $1.5 billion pollution controls into the plant, the new owner bought the plant and announced within months that they're going to shut the plant down. So we're a bit frustrated with that when people are doing what they need to do, they're in compliance, it's a coal-fired plant, And we're frustrated and don't see the reason for this. But in the case where at some plants it's inevitable that they'll be shut down, maybe for legitimate reasons, that's certainly not, we don't see that as a legitimate reason to be shutting the plant down if it's in compliance. We're proposing something like a wires charge, so that the people that are affected, the cost to bear on all of this is spread out amongst everybody. There shouldn't be one group of people, as was mentioned earlier too, that should bear the whole brunt of this. And there's enough money in the energy industry, it's been said, there's more money there than in the big three automakers combined. There's no reason why people should be able to get retraining, severance, economic development for these affected communities. So this is just one of the things that we're proposing. Certainly EPA is not the only government agency that would need to be involved in this, but we ask that you take a look as you go forward and do this and look at, put these guidelines in on a case-by-case basis, a plant-by-plant basis. A one-size-fits-all doesn't necessarily work. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
One thing I did want to mention before I start my own testimony was that while 172 members were recently displaced and literally thrown out on the street, First Energy does have jobs available in our other business units. They held these folks hostage and tried to get something else from our union. So that is part of the tragedy that is going on. What I would like to tell you, though, specifically to the power station industry and some of the things that are revolving around that, we do believe that we can burn coal cleanly in our power stations if companies like First Energy were required to do the right thing and start investing in technology to burn coal cleaner. Similar to what happened with the auto industry back in the late 60s. When I was a young man, I purchased a 1969 Camaro. It was required to have a pollution pump on it. It was the last thing that General Motors wanted to do to that model of car. Today, that same model of car is faster, it burns cleaner, and it gets better gas mileage than the previous model from 1969. This can be done, but companies like First Energy must be required and regulated to do the right thing, not only for our employees, but for the ratepayers and for the environment. That's where the problem is. A company like First Energy has the free hand to just close power stations for political reasons or other reasons, and the real story needs to be told somewhere along the way as to why they're doing that. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to do that here. The other thing that I will tell you is this. The closing of these power stations is going to put a tremendous extra burden onto the grid system. The grid system in the former Allegheny Energy area, which serves a lot of Pennsylvania, was built in the 40s and 50s. It has not been maintained or upgraded since then. It has outlived its life expectancy. By closing the Hatfield Power Station, Mitchell Power Station, and Armstrong Power Station, you are going to start to see grid failures. Listen to the news when their company spokesman comes on the news and says it was an act of God or it's the worst storm they ever seen. I am here to tell you this is due to lack of maintenance, not only on the transmission grid, but other areas. But companies like First Energy need to be required to disclose what they're doing with ratepayers' money, because electricity is essential for national security, the economics of Pennsylvania, and also for the well-being of every citizen in this country. So I would say that this is bigger than the EPA. We need to have a collaborative effort to make First Energy and other utilities good corporate citizens along the way. Thank you very much for your time.
Richard Winchell, I'm number 10. I'm Director of Research Services with Consol Energy. I want to start by saying that we disagree with EPA's decision to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act because it's an ineffective and economically harmful way to address climate change. Recently proposed 111B regulations would effectively ban new, efficient, state-of-the-art coal-fired generating plants, and we're concerned with EPA's plan to regulate CO2 emissions from existing sources will negatively impact our ability to produce affordable and reliable electricity. Recent EPA regulations have already contributed to the closure or announced closures of 332 coal units just since 2010. And according to my company's projections, these regulations have put another 190 coal units at severe risk of closure. These 522 units are located in 35 states, and I ask you to keep in mind that each one of them that closes results in a loss of well-paying jobs for plant workers, boiler makers, coal miners, and others, and a major loss of local property taxes. However, since carbon regulations for existing sources are going to be developed, we recommend that EPA should follow these 5 principles in developing them. First, EPA's carbon regulations should do no harm. Carbon regulations should not interfere with affordable and reliable electricity supplies, especially in states that rely on coal. Second, since EPA's regulation should provide states with all the flexibility and time they need to develop plans that suit their unique circumstances, including continuing their reliance on coal if they so choose. Third, coal plant owners invested $30 billion between 2007 and 2011 on flue gas desulfurization alone. This does not count controls on the other pollutants. EPA must assure that carbon regulations do not cause additional premature closures of coal units and strand these sunk investments in emission controls. Fourth, reducing CO2 emissions is not a state or national issue, it's a global issue. Reducing CO2 emissions from the U.S. coal fleet, which only accounts for about 6.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, will increase energy prices without any meaningful impact on global climate change. So we will have accomplished nothing other than further weakening an already fragile economy. Instead, EPA should be working with the Department of Energy and other agencies to develop and execute a well-funded plan to broadly commercialize carbon capture and storage. Implementation of CCS technology for both coal and natural gas fuel generation can achieve meaningful CO2 generation on a global scale. Finally, efficiency improvements are a cost-effective way to reduce emissions while continuing to provide affordable and reliable electricity. EPA should remove regulatory barriers to efficiency improvements at existing coal-fired power plants. In specific, I mean new source review as it currently exists. Thank you.
Tom Crooks. I'm from Washington, Pennsylvania, which is the fossil energy capital of the world, or so I'm told. It's a great opportunity to get to give your own eulogy. It's really sort of an odd place to be, but much as the folks who've already spoken so eloquently from my industry, which is the coal industry, and those that support the coal industry and the coal electricity supply chain have said so beautifully, there will be impacts to hundreds of thousands of people, including my family and lots of others. So I'm not going to go into the depth of that because I don't know that anybody is really fighting that. But I think too that it's important for us to realize that we actually all have something in common that we don't realize at times. I've heard lots of speakers, they've all been really good. You know, I'm a Christian, just like the evangelical first person. I have children. My wife's had surgeries. All of that is what we share in. We all believe that the environment should be improved. We're all in favor of that. The people that work for me and work with me are fishermen, hunters. They care about the environment. So please, let's all remember that we, believe it or not, are on the same team in many, many respects. But what we urge you to do is to consider that we want to innovate as a coal industry and as the coal electricity supply chain, but we'll need a little time and a little bit of help. It's very difficult, the challenge that we face, and we would like to express our wishes for you to give us a realistic time frame to get those things accomplished. Also, one of the great things I have about living in the Washington County, Pennsylvania area is that I have a really cheap electric bill, thanks to some of these guys right here in the front row. There's big advantages of having cheap electricity. You should realize that. Everything that we do, it is advantageous to have cheap electricity. We would urge that everything that you do in your framework, all the prisms that you look through, while we solve these problems together, maintain these low-cost advantages. Thank you very much.
I'm Clark. I'm the business manager of Boilermakers Local 13 here in Philadelphia. I represent over 1,000 members and cover 41 counties in PA. Cut Pennsylvania in half, we represent the eastern half. We provide the labor to construct and maintain all types of power plants in our region. The future of our jobs and the welfare of our families and communities will be virtually impacted by the EPA's decision on the guidelines for existing source of greenhouse gas controls for power plants scheduled to be proposed of June of 14. We already are experiencing job loss due to shutdowns of coal plants in response to the EPA's new mercury rule and lower price of natural gas. It is widely recognized that 50,000 megawatts of coal capacity or more will be shut down. This will represent the largest job loss in the history of the Clean Air Act. Let me put a face on this closure, just in this Philadelphia area. Crombie Station closed May of 2011, that was 144 megawatts. Eddystone Station 1, 325 megawatts, closed October 11. Crombie Station 2, 201, 100 megawatts, closed May 2012. Eddystone Station number 2, 325 megawatts, closed May of 12. Portland Station, 427 megawatts, that'll be closed in June of 14. Titus Station and Sunbury, they're scheduled to close in 15. I'm just getting warmed up. Within a couple miles of this area, we used to work at Delaware Station, Richmond Station, Chester Station. They're all gone. Our members don't work there no more. These job losses will accelerate in 2015 and 16 when the Mercury Rule takes effect. We, along with other unions involved in the maintenance, fuel supply, and operation of coal plants, will lose tens of thousands of high-paying, high-skilled jobs, and it will not be made up if more natural gas replaces coal. Many natural gas generating plants are remotely controlled and have few permanent employees. Our primary concern about EPA's existing source guidelines for CO2 reduction is finding ways to avoid the loss of jobs at plants that we have invested billions in retrofit controls. We know that the recently proposed rule on new power plants effectively closed the door on the construction of new coal plants and already endangers our future as a highly skilled construction craft. I'm going to skip the rest of this, so I want to get around real quick. We don't only just build boilers, we build the quality air control systems that are involved in these. You have selective catalytic reduction systems, activated carbon ejection systems, that's for mercury control, hydrated lime ejection system, that's for hydrofluoric acid control. No one has brought up the idea of co-firing these boilers, mixing coal and gas together to bring down the emissions and keep our jobs in this area. We also build dry electrostatic precipitators, low NOx burners, and spray dry absorbers, fabric filter bag houses, and wet flue gas desulfurizers. All these products help control the pollution on the back end of these boilers. So please, we help us keep our jobs. Thank you.
Good morning. It's still morning, right? Good morning. My name is Joe Minett, and I'm the Chief Counsel and Executive Director of the Clean Air Council. The Council is a regional environmental advocacy organization whose mission is to protect everyone's right to breathe clean air. Because my time is so limited, and there are many others that want to share their thoughts with you, I'm summarizing the Council's comments, but I have attached them. I want to start to address two comments that I heard today. The first was the industry representative that said, do no harm. When the industry says do no harm, they ignore the harm to public health caused by carbon emissions. What they're saying is protect our profits at the expense of public health. They also say give us more time. Sounds reasonable. But what they are saying, what the industry is saying when they ask for more time, is we have spent our resources over the years delaying any control of carbon emissions, and now we want EPA to continue to help delay addressing this issue. Don't buy into it. As the Council outlines in more detail in our written comments, we believe that there is firm legal basis for EPA's authority to promulgate a rule addressing carbon emissions from existing sources under 111D of the Clean Air Act. In the absence of congressional action, EPA's authority under 111D is the best, most immediate available mechanism for tackling the serious problem of carbon emissions from power plants. We have passed 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This is a crisis. We cannot continue to debate and wring our hands as the planet burns. The Council urges EPA to consider the following in crafting the proposed rule. First, in order for the new rule to be as effective as possible at reducing carbon pollution over the long term, the state plans must adapt to keep pace with improvements in technology. The, quote, best system of emission reduction that the Clean Air Act calls for has been interpreted as being technology forcing, as looking forward what may be projected for the regulated future rather than being based on present technology. EPA should therefore adopt a strong rule that gives states the flexibility to incorporate true renewable portfolio standards, not one that pits one fossil fuel against the other. That makes no sense for EPA to support a rule that encourages increased use of methane, which is more destructive than carbon dioxide. Until the United States effectively addresses its own carbon emissions, we will have no credibility on this issue and therefore not be able to effectively work with the rest of the world, countries, to effectively address the global problem of climate change. Thank you.